Okay, let's get into it. So in this video, we're going to look at how a compressor operates, the different parameters that you have control over with the compressor and how they work, how to use it, what compression does. Okay, so the compressor I'm going to be using for this is the FabFilter Pro C2. It's an awesome, really versatile compressor, and I highly recommend checking it out. But all the things that we look at, or the majority of the parameters we look at today, are on most compressors. So they'll be applicable to most circumstances that you use them in. Okay, so we're going to be processing a little basic drum break that I made. It sounds like this. Nothing too fancy, nothing too busy, just a nice simple break to see what the compression does. Okay, so let's take a look. So first thing we're going to look at is the threshold. The threshold, what that does is that's the level that your compression is going to start taking place. Okay, so as you can see over here, my peaks are hitting about minus 9.2. So I need to have a threshold at that or below that for any compression to actually take place. If I have that threshold set anywhere between 0 and minus 9.2, it's not going to do anything. So I need to push that below that level, and then the compression is going to start happening. But it's not going to do anything until I start messing with the ratio. Okay, I'll talk about that in just a sec. Now with Pro C2, you can check out the input gain. So this is the amount of level going into the compressor. GC is the gain change, I believe that stands for, but most compressors it'll be gain reduction. So that's the amount of compression that's actually taking place. That's the gain reduction that the compressor is applying. And the output level is after the compression. So it's how hot your output signal is coming out. Okay. So we need to take all of these into account when doing compression. So let's have a look. So as I increase this ratio and pull the threshold down, we're going to see this red gain change here start to actually do something. So just watch. Okay, so you notice as I pulled that threshold down, the further down that I got, the more intense that compression got, because that means that every dB that goes over that threshold there is going to be compressed, and the amount of compression, the amount of the level that goes over the threshold that is going to be compressed, the ratio controls that. Okay, so for example, if you've got say a 2-to-1 ratio, and your threshold is set at, let's just say minus 15. Every 2 decibels that goes over that minus 15 dB is going to output 1 decibel. Okay, for every 2 that go over that threshold. So for example, if your material that goes into the compressor goes 4 dB over minus 15, then it's going to only spit out 2 dB. Okay, so it's going to apply 2 dB of gain reduction there. All right, so same as if the ratio is at 5-to-1, there's going to be more compression. So for every 5 decibels that go over the threshold, it's only going to output 1 decibel. So if you've got 10 dB over the threshold, it's only going to output 2. So you've got essentially 8 dB of gain reduction there. All right, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, essentially threshold is the level where the compression takes place. Ratio is the amount of compression that you're actually applying. Okay, so if you don't want to get too bogged down in the maths of it, ratio is just the amount of compression. Okay. All right, so we've got those going. That's great. We can see some compression happening. We can hear some compression happening. Next, we need to look at the attack and release settings. And these are going to be dependent on whatever material that you're feeding your compressor. Okay, so this is where the compression really starts to shine and your ability to use compression really starts to take effect, okay? Because this is where you get a lot of control. So you can look at compression as like a automated volume knob, basically, but a little bit fancier than that. But it's if we break it right down, that's basically what it is, okay? And the attack and release is how fast we control that volume knob. All right, so the attack is the amount of time it takes for the compression to start taking effect, and the release is the amount of time after the gain reduction has been applied that it goes back up. Okay, so you'll notice if I start messing with this now with the drum brake going, you'll notice as I change these settings, you'll see how this little red meter reacts to it. And I can really exaggerate it. If I pull that threshold right down, you'll really hear what these attack and release do. Okay, so notice as the attack goes up, you get more of that transient coming through and it gets a bit clickier, especially if I have that release right down, because it's just letting the transient through and then clamping down. And if I go to a faster attack time, it's not even really letting that transient through, so it's squashing it right away. So a couple of really, really cool ways that, apart from hearing what's happening with the compression, you look at your ears first, okay? So listen to what's happening first. But there's some really cool tools that you can use that let you visualize what's happening with the compression. Pro C2 has this visualizer. If you hit this display button, it defaults to on. It has this red line here, and that shows you where the compression is taking place and how much. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so the red line is the amount of compression and the white line is our drum brake, the visualization of that coming in. So you can see it's compressing on those peaks harder than it is between them, okay? So those little sort of snare shuffles in between, they're not getting affected by the compressor. And what's happening there is actually that amount of volume between that ghost note and the little shuffle on the snare and the main snare hit and the kick, the dynamic range is being decreased. So that's what compression is. We're decreasing the dynamic range of something, okay? Not only are we doing that, but we're adding, you can use it to add punch, you can use it to tighten things up, you can use it to add weight, you can use it for a whole bunch of different reasons. Another important little tool that you can use when you're looking at compression is this Smexoscope. It's Smart Electronics. It's free. Just look it up, Google it. And it's just a visualizer for the waveforms. So we'll look at it without the compression and we'll look at it with the compression and have a look at what the compression is actually doing. So I'll turn the compressor off first. So there's my drum brake. Okay, you can see those real spiky transients there, and we want to sort of control those, bring up the bits in between, and just make this drum brake a bit more present and more full. I always start with the threshold down, ratio down, and go from there. There's no I don't go with or like any preset way of approaching things. I listen to the material and then adjust the threshold and the ratio until the compressor starts working and I get as much compression as I want. Then I start messing with the attack and release. Notice how when I went down then, the transients started to slip away. And this is where we get into our makeup gain territory. Okay, now what's happening here is that this Pro C2 has this auto makeup gain as a default. I'm going to turn that off and I want you to look at the input versus the output levels. So input here, output here. Okay, so notice depending on where I've got it, that output level is changing based on the way I've got the compressor set. So you want to basically always be matching the input with the output. You don't want the compressor to make things quieter, and you don't want particularly the compressor to make your material louder, because if you have the compressor in there and you're fiddling around and the output is louder than the input, you're going to instantly think it's better because you turn something up and your brain just goes, processes and just goes, well, I think that sounds better because it's louder. And that's not necessarily the case. You might not even be hearing what the compressor's doing. So it's really important to be matching your input gain and output gain by adjusting this. Okay, so you can adjust your wet gain here to match the level. So let's start doing that. Okay, so without compression, with that absolutely slamming compression, and let's just adjust it back for a bit more subtle. We need to bring that output gain back down. Okay, now it's nice and level matched. Okay, so what the compression's doing there is it's sort of adding a bit more punch. It's pulling up the tails of those, the drum hits there, and just that sort of air in between. It's pulling that up a bit, making that a bit more present. Okay, so that's our main controls of a compressor. Remember, threshold is where the compression starts working, the level that it starts working. Ratio is our amount of compression. Attack is how fast the compression takes hold, and the release is when after the compression has done its thing. It's how long it takes to start going back up. Okay, and then we need it to mess with our output gain, our makeup gain, to make sure that it's roughly the same level that's going into the compressor after we've applied our gain reduction. Okay. Now, another little thing that you can have with Pro C2 and a couple of other different types of compressors is this knee. Most compressors have this set. Some have a switch to make it a hard knee or a soft knee, and this one has sort of like a slider so you can change it. Notice how it changes this here. This is the knee. So a hard knee is the compression's a bit more aggressive, and as the soft knee, it's a bit rounder and takes a little bit longer to respond. So if I mess with those on the drums, let's see what it does. it's really subtle, but it's a little bit like rounder here. And a bit more aggressive as we go back up to hard there. Okay. So that's basically compression in a nutshell, the different controls that we have. It's rare to see any other controls apart from the ones that I've showed you. Some software compressors particularly can be quite complex. Pro C2 is quite a complex compressor, but they're the threshold ratio, attack, release, and our gain, they're the main controls that you're going to see in a compressor. So I hope that helps, and I'll see you over in the next video.